The headset crackled, and for a moment, Zuri Danladi thought she had crossed a wire. She was on her knees under the mixing console in the hotel's grand ballroom, tracing a stray cable back to its source, when a second voice bled into her earpiece, where there should have been silence. Not the summit's rehearsal feed, something else. Something private. The file is already planted in the East Conference Room. Once he walks in for the private meeting, security finds it on his laptop within the hour. Zuri froze, one hand still gripping the cable, her heart lurching sideways in her chest. And if someone else is in the room with him? A second voice asked, cool and clipped. Then they go down with him. Accomplice. Doesn't matter who. She did not move. She barely breathed. Her thumb hovered over the channel selector. Some deep instinct screaming at her to switch it off, to pretend she had heard nothing, to finish her job and disappear into the noise of the summit like she did every single day of her life. Nobody paid attention to the woman running cables under tablecloths. That invisibility had always been her armor, but she kept listening. The board votes on the acquisition contract tomorrow. By the time he realizes what's happening, the shares will already be moving. Park will have control before lunch. Her stomach dropped. Park, Director Park Sung-ho, one of the most trusted men on Jung Tae-wook's board, a man photographed at Tae-wook's side in half the business magazines she'd seen stacked in the hotel lobby that week. They were going to frame him. Embezzlement, planted evidence, an ambush disguised as a private meeting, and any innocent bystander caught in that room turned into collateral damage by association. Her hands trembled slightly around the cable, adrenaline sharpening every sound in the room, the distant hum of the air conditioning suddenly deafening, her own pulse loud in her ears. She thought, briefly, of how exhausted she already was. 3 summits back to back this month, her knees aching from crawling under stages, her rent quietly climbing while her hours stayed the same. She thought of how easy it would be to unplug the headset, walk away, and let rich men do what rich men had always done to each other. And then, unbidden, another memory surfaced. Weeks ago, outside a different hotel, she had watched a tall man in an expensive coat stop at a street vendor's stall, an elderly woman selling vegetables from a cart nobody else had bothered to glance at. He had bought everything she had, every single item, and pressed far more money into her hands than the vegetables were worth, waving off her stunned gratitude and walking away without a single photograph taken, without a single word to the cameras that weren't even there. She had not known his name that day. She had only known what she saw, a powerful man choosing kindness when no one was watching. She knew now, from the summit itinerary pinned to the wall behind her, that the man who owned this hotel's biggest contract, the man arriving within the hour for his own board's private ambush, was that same man. Zuri made her decision before she even finished the thought. She yanked the headset cable free, grabbed her badge, and moved. The hallway outside the East Conference Room was long, marble-floored, lined with framed photographs of past summits and smiling executives. Zuri had walked it 100 times pushing equipment carts, invisible to the men in tailored suits, who never once held a door for her. Now she stood at its center, waiting, her whole body thrumming with a fear she refused to let win. When Jung Tae-wook rounded the corner, flanked by 2 assistants and moving with the unhurried authority of a man who had never once been late for anything in his life, she stepped directly into his path. He stopped only because stopping was less inconvenient than walking through her. Up close, he was more intimidating than she expected, tall, immaculately dressed, his expression carved from something colder than stone. His eyes flicked over her badge, her uniform, dismissing her in under a second. "Move," he said, not cruelly, simply as a fact. "You can't go in there," Zuri said. One of his assistants stepped forward to physically guide her aside. Tae-wook lifted 2 fingers, and the assistant stopped, though his cold eyes never left her face. "Excuse me?" "The East Conference Room," she said, her voice shaking but steady enough to be understood. "It's a trap. Director Park planted evidence on your laptop. Embezzlement. If you walk in there, or if anyone walks in with you, you're both finished." For a moment, nobody moved. Then something flickered across his face, not concern, but irritation. The particular irritation of a powerful man being told something absurd by someone he had never bothered to look at twice. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Zuri said. "You're the man who bought an old woman's entire vegetable stand a few weeks ago and paid her 10 times what it was worth because you didn't want her worrying anymore. I saw it. Nobody else did. That's the only reason I'm standing here, risking my job to tell you your own board is about to destroy you." His expression did not soften exactly, but something in it stilled, recalibrated, as though he were running her words through some internal calculation he could not quite make add up in her favor, and yet could not dismiss either. "You're mistaken," he said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty, a small crack in the otherwise flawless composure he wore like armor. "I'm not." Zuri's heart pounded against her ribs so hard she was sure he could hear it. This was the boldest, most reckless thing she had ever done in her life, and every second he stood there unconvinced, felt like the ground shifting beneath her. She thought of every reason to stop talking, to apologize, and step aside and let this powerful stranger walk into whatever waited for him. But she thought, too, of the old woman, and the vegetable cart, and she held her ground. "I heard them on an open channel, about 20 minutes ago. Your name, Director Park's name, a planted file, a private meeting, timed exactly for right now." Tae-wook studied her for a long, unreadable moment, his gaze moving over her face as though searching for the tell of a lie, some flicker of ambition or fear that would explain why a stranger in a technician's uniform would risk her livelihood on a warning that could easily be dismissed as delusion. He found none of it, only steady, unwavering conviction. He turned toward the conference room doors as if to prove her wrong simply by walking through them, his assistants already stepping aside to clear his path. Zuri did something she would later be unable to fully explain, even to herself. She grabbed his sleeve, her fingers closing around expensive fabric, a gesture so far outside anything she would normally dare that even the assistants behind him seemed to freeze in place, uncertain whether to intervene. "Please," she said. "Give me 2 minutes. If I'm lying, walk in there and have me arrested yourself. But if I'm right, and you walk through that door anyway, you lose everything you've built." Something about the desperation in her voice, raw and unpolished and utterly without personal gain, made him pause. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back up at her face, and whatever calculation had been running behind his eyes seemed, finally, to shift in her favor. 2 minutes, he said finally. She pulled him, stunned assistants trailing behind, into the small soundproof AV booth tucked beside the ballroom stage, and locked the door before he could change his mind. Inside the cramped booth, surrounded by cables and monitors, Zuri pulled up the recorded audio buffer on her laptop, the last 20 minutes of the stray channel automatically archived the way it always was for technical review. She hit play. Director Park's voice filled the small room, unmistakable, precise, utterly damning. The file is already planted in the East Conference Room. Once he walks in for the private meeting, security finds it on his laptop within the hour. Tae-wook's face, for the first time since she had met him minutes earlier, changed completely. The cold composure cracked, replaced by something far more dangerous, a stillness that felt like the moment before a building collapses. And if someone else is in the room with him? Then they go down with him. Accomplice. Doesn't matter who. He listened to the entire recording without a single word, his jaw tightening, his hands curling slowly into fists at his sides. When it finished, the silence in the booth stretched long enough that Zuri began to wonder if she had made a big mistake. "How long have you had access to this channel?" he asked finally, his voice low. "I don't. It crossed mine by accident during setup. I wasn't trying to hear it. But you didn't ignore it." "No," she said simply. "I couldn't." He looked at her then, really looked, the way no one in this hotel had looked at her in the entire 3 years she'd worked events like this one. "What's your name?" "Zuri Danladi." "Zuri Danladi," he repeated, as if committing it permanently to memory. "You just saved my company. Possibly my freedom. I just told you the truth, she said. What you do with it now is up to you. Something shifted in his expression, cold calculation returning, but different now, sharper, aimed entirely at the men who had underestimated him. Then let's make sure they regret underestimating both of us, he said. The hours that followed moved fast, though to Zuri they felt like they stretched and compressed all at once, adrenaline making some minutes crawl, and others vanish entirely. Taewook, working quietly with her technical guidance, rerouted the summit's main audio and screen systems so that a single command from the control booth could override every display in the ballroom simultaneously. It was delicate work, the kind that left no room for a single loose wire or mistimed cue, and Zuri built the sequence herself, her exhausted hands steady now with purpose instead of fear. Taewook, meanwhile, made calls that ended careers before they even happened, his voice low and controlled even as the men on the other end of the line scrambled to understand how quickly their world was unraveling. He did not raise his voice once. He did not need to. Every instruction he gave carried the quiet certainty of a man who had already calculated 3 moves beyond whatever his enemies believed they were planning. At one point, he paused beside the booth's monitors and looked at her directly. "You didn't have to come find me in that hallway," he said. "You could have reported it to security and disappeared into the crowd. No one would have known. Security answers to the same board that's trying to bury you," Zuri said. "I didn't know who else to trust with it." He considered that for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Then I suppose I owe you more than I first realized." She said nothing, focusing instead on the cable in her hands, unwilling to let herself hope for anything beyond simply surviving the next few hours intact. Backstage, waiting for the summit to begin, Zuri felt the full weight of what she had done settle over her chest like a stone. Her palms were damp against the equipment cases. Every time footsteps passed the curtain behind her, her whole body tensed. Certain Park had somehow discovered the recording had been compromised and was coming to silence her before she could do any more damage. If this failed, she would lose far more than her job. She might lose her freedom, too, an accomplice in whatever story the board decided to tell about how the recording had been obtained. But she thought again of the old woman with the vegetable cart, of small kindnesses that mattered, even when no one was watching, and she found she could not regret a single second of what she had done. Whatever came next, she had chosen to see clearly when it would have been so much easier to look away. Quick stop, Afro Korean Vibes community, kindly like this video and subscribe to the channel. I would love to know where you are watching from. Kindly drop it in the comment. The summit ballroom filled with shareholders, executives, and press, warm lights spilling over rows of expensive suits, and the low murmur of anticipation. Director Park stood near the front, composed, confident, straightening his tie with the ease of a man who believed the outcome of the next hour was already decided in his favor. He had no idea the trap he had built now had teeth pointed back at him. Midway through the proceedings, Park rose to address the room, producing a slim folder with practiced solemnity, his expression arranged into something resembling regret. "It grieves me to bring this forward," he said, his voice thick with false sorrow. "But evidence has come to light suggesting serious financial misconduct by our CEO. Embezzlement, discovered in a private review just this morning. I move that the board consider immediate removal, effective today." Murmurs rippled through the room. Several board members, clearly in on the plan, nodded gravely, playing their parts with rehearsed precision, exchanging glances that suggested the vote was already a formality. Yoon Tae-wook rose slowly from his seat, allowing the silence to stretch, letting Park's confidence swell one final, fatal degree before he spoke. "Before the board votes," Tae-wook said calmly, "I think everyone deserves to hear exactly how thorough Director Park's investigation truly was." He nodded once toward the control booth at the back of the room. Every screen in the ballroom flickered to life simultaneously, and Director Park's own voice filled the room, unmistakable, recorded, and utterly damning. "The file is already planted in the East Conference Room. Then they go down with him. Accomplice. Doesn't matter who." The color drained from Park's face in real time, visible to every camera in the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones rose instinctively to capture the moment. Board members who had smiled and nodded moments earlier now sat frozen in their seats, recognizing their own voices layered beneath his on the recording, unable to look at each other or at the shareholders now staring back at them. "You planted fake evidence against me," Taewook said, his voice carrying easily across the stunned ballroom without needing to rise even slightly. "And you were prepared to destroy anyone standing beside me in that room. Guilty or not. I want everyone here to understand exactly what kind of man just asked you to remove me." Security moved in swiftly from both sides of the ballroom. Park's protests dissolved into desperate, stammering denials that convinced no one, drowned out entirely by his own recorded confession, still echoing faintly through the sound system as he was led toward the exit. He and 3 co-conspirators on the board were escorted out under the unwavering gaze of every camera in the room, their careers ending publicly and permanently in the same breath, their names already trending across financial news outlets before they had even reached the lobby. Once the chaos settled and order returned to the room, Taewook addressed the shareholders again, his composure fully restored, betraying nothing of the fury Zuri knew was still coiled somewhere beneath the surface. "Despite this morning's events," he said, "I am pleased to announce the acquisition of the largest contract in this company's history, secured this week." Applause rose cautiously at first, then swelled into something genuine. "And I want to be clear that none of this would have been possible without one person, whose integrity and courage saved far more than a business deal today. I'll have more to say about her soon. For now, only know that this company owes her everything." Backstage, once the ballroom had emptied and the last camera crew packed away their equipment, Taewook found Zuri exactly where he expected, quietly coiling cables, as if the entire day had been nothing more than routine, as if she hadn't just watched a man's career collapse on live screens because of what she chose to do in a hallway that morning. He crossed the room and pulled her into a tight embrace before either of them could think to make it formal or appropriate. Simply grateful. Simply relieved, the kind of embrace that said more than any speech he could have given in front of the shareholders. "You could have walked away," he said quietly, his voice rough in a way she hadn't heard from him yet. "Most people would have. I saw who you really were before you ever knew I existed," Zuri said. "I wasn't going to let people who never truly knew you erase that." That evening, he took her to dinner, away from cameras and boardrooms, somewhere quiet enough for real conversation, the kind of restaurant she would never have been able to afford on her own salary and would never have imagined stepping into under any other circumstance. She told him about the elderly vendor, about how the memory of that small, unfilmed kindness had lodged itself in her chest and refused to let go, about how she had simply been unable to look away from injustice, even when staying silent would have been so much easier and so much safer. He listened, truly listened, in a way few people ever had, asking questions instead of filling the silence with his own opinions, and something settled between them that felt less like gratitude and more like the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find that week. Days later, he invited her to his headquarters, where she was welcomed not through a side door, but through the main entrance, past a lobby of polished stone and quiet murals, introduced formally to the entire senior staff as the new lead of technical operations, personally chosen to spearhead the very contract her honesty had helped secure. Applause followed the announcement, some of it genuine, some of it cautious, but none of it dismissive, not anymore. Among the staff gathered to greet her that morning was a woman Zuri recognized instantly, the same well-dressed stranger who had mocked her uniform at a restaurant months earlier, rolling her eyes at Zuri's exhaustion and muttering something cruel about people who worked with their hands instead of their minds, while her friends laughed along beside her. That woman, Farah Whitcomb, now stood several ranks beneath her, assigned to arrange the furniture and design layout in Zuri's new office, unable to meet her eyes as she measured the space for a desk that would never be hers. Zuri said nothing unkind. She did not need to. The room, and the quiet reversal it represented, had already spoken for itself far louder than any words she could have chosen. A month later, Taewook hosted a private dinner in her honor, low candlelight and quiet music replacing the chandeliers and cameras of that first chaotic day. The two of them finally alone, with none of the noise that had defined how they met. He raised his glass and told her he wanted more than gratitude between them, more than a professional arrangement built from crisis and quick decisions made under pressure. He wanted to see, slowly and honestly, without the weight of the world watching, where this could lead between them. She raised her glass to meet his, her hand steady now in a way it hadn't been in that hallway weeks ago. "Okay," she said simply, "let's find out." In the end, the world had tried to teach Zuri Danladi that people like her existed to be overlooked, to crawl beneath stages and vanish into the background of other people's success. But integrity has a way of refusing to stay invisible. The people who mistake kindness for weakness or dismiss quiet competence as beneath their notice are so often the ones left standing in the wreckage of their own arrogance, while the ones they underestimated rise to stand exactly where they belong. Never assume the person nobody notices has nothing to offer. Sometimes, they are the only ones paying attention at all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more amazing Afro Korean drama stories, and we'll see you in the next one.